forced to say Manchester United, really. Seriously. So we're talking about media on trial. That's the subject here, and no better time for this because the Sri Ganeshaya Namah of this has been done by Hartosh and his story with the Supreme Court ruling yesterday that the PIL. I don't know if all of you followed it, so I'll just give you a little bit of context. There was a judge who died way beyond his years, and the family suggested that there may be foul play. The Caravan did a story, a pretty good report on that, and that report was part of a demand for an independent inquiry into the judge's death, and that was struck down yesterday, calling the PIL frivolous. So let me start with you, Hartosh, and after that I'd like to come to Mr. Dikshit, who has first-hand faced the wrath of the state when he was imprisoned. He could tell us a little bit about that and how that was resolved. Hartosh, we know law always lags behind technology, and we're seeing that with all over the world. Countries that are far and more responsive in India are not able to keep up with Twitter, Facebook, and other such technologies, especially in dissemination of news. But is the law also being unable to keep up with the flow of basic democratic values as they become more democratic and more outspoken and more combative? From your experience in this story, where do you find that dissonance?
I think in the context of the story, I think the problem is far more old-fashioned. And that old-fashioned problem is that a certain kind of truth is always unpalatable to authority. It has very little to do with technology. It has to do with just doing work as journalists, spending time on a story, following it wherever it takes. And a consequence of that is always that people who are in power are troubled by such things. I cannot suggest that the Supreme Court judgment had anything to do with it, because that is not how we are supposed to look at the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court judgment raises troubling questions about how facts are adjudicated in this country. The facts are rather clear. I have to say, on the facts, I disagree strongly with the conclusions the Supreme Court has raised. And we've reached a pretty bad place if we cannot have a natural inquiry into the death of a judge who was in charge of a case where the main accused was the now BJP President Amit Shah, one of the two most powerful persons. I think whether it is the Supreme Court or whether it is any other institution, I think that adage that we always use, that not only must justice be done, it should be seen to be done. I think that is very difficult to achieve, and we are drawing away from that in this country. And I think it is far beyond technology. It has to do with power structures, and it's an old-fashioned problem.
Thanks. Before I come to Mr. Dikshit, The Wire was also kind of pursuing this story and did a few pieces. While I get what Hartosh says, it's an old-fashioned problem. Just now, Ayush was sharing headline in the Times of India. Even as we speak, the opposition parties are back together to get some sort of an impeachment motion against the Chief Justice, and the Supreme Court is kind of suggesting that there should be some sort of clampdown or restriction on the media on reporting on the impeachment proceedings. So while I understand the old-fashioned problems of power, that means the Supreme Court or the government, is it also unexecutable? Like if people discuss that on Twitter or Facebook, or if people discuss your story. Okay, is that even executable? Do you think your story was shared widely? I know it got a lot of traffic. How do you even clamp down on this?
You're talking about the Jay Shah story.
That's right.
Yes. I think before I come to that, most important and what comes out of the discussion thus far, and Chelin's talk earlier, is that we are seeing institutional capture in various ways. And when we talk of institutions, of course, the Supreme Court is the highest institution, the Supreme Court in last appeal, and if that goes, we are gone, in a sense. But the point is, media as an institution, how do we protect that space? I think that's the question we ask ourselves. Now, that's why I'm glad that the Caravan followed up on the Justice Lawyer's story, despite a lot of pressure on it. Now, what is a Caravan? It's a small player, and tremendous pressure has been brought upon it. So, I mean, I really take my hat off, my non-existent hat off to Hartosh, to Jose and others who have kept it a small team of 15 people, I believe, core people, keeping the idea of the story alive and taking on what is perhaps the most powerful person in the country short of the Prime Minister. With the Jay Shah story, surprises, surprises, we land up the same person. So here you're seeing the kind of power, naked power, manifesting itself in various ways, and how information is sought to be controlled in order to keep that power going. So the challenge really is for all of us to be able to question that power.
Speaking of questioning power, Mr. Dikshit was arrested in 2013, is that right? 2015. And the allegation against you was of corruption or one such, because you had questioned the appointment of an individual to the anti-corruption body. Can you just tell us a little about that and how you negotiated that space? And you did suspend publication of Himal at the time. What happened and how do you come out of that?
Well, to begin with, Abhinandan, thank you. I really don't want the rest of the conversation to go away from the very important topic that you just got started here, because that goes to the heart of the matter in relation to media in India, the largest democracy of South Asia, and what is happening in India and in relation to Indian media is being watched carefully by all the surrounding societies, including those in Nepal and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and Pakistan. So just quickly the takeaway from my case was essentially that the anti-corruption watchdog in Nepal was appointed with the political forces in Nepal and the administration appointed one of the most corrupt people to head that anti-corruption watchdog. So we went to the streets. And what we realized was that in this modern era, one is a direct action that the state can take against a journalist. Another is the many ways in which you can use state mechanisms to go after a publisher or an editor or a reporter that are beyond the realm of censorship. So in the days ahead, we got to be alert in India or Pakistan or Bangladesh, elsewhere. For example, in Bangladesh, our friends Mahfouz Anam and Motiur Rahman and others are being made to run pillar to post in sedition cases that have been filed in more than 70 jurisdictions. So they're spending their time running from place to place. So I think what we have to be alert to is not just the classical way that the state comes down against you. In my case, by a particular gentleman named Lokman Singh Karki, who was appointed to the position not only through the Nepali political forces, but certain geopolitical forces with an aim to control Nepali politics by appointing the anti-corruption watchdog chief as their man, quote unquote. But what they try to do in our case, they has made life impossible not just in the media house that I was running at the time, Himal South Asian, but also pretty much everything that I was involved in, family-wise and outside of family. NGOs, a spinal injury rehab center that I happen to have started, a public bus company that I happen to be chair of. So this is what we got to be alert to, that the media in this modern era can be pursued beyond just the superficial way of censorship. But I would just like to go back to the issue because I personally think that out of Sonipat, some of the most interesting discussion can come forward in relation to media in India and where it is going. And I could say how perturbed I am personally as well. And I'm one who believes as a South Asian, as well as being a person from Nepal, that it should be possible for somebody from Kathmandu to be able to critique what's happening in India. Just as it's okay for somebody from India to critique what's happening in Pakistan or Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. So I just make 3 anecdotal references as to where I think India as a whole is going, which is not going to do the rest of South Asia, India, and the whole world a lot of good. Just 3 anecdotes. When Himal South Asian was forced to close down in Kathmandu, our first choice was to come into India. And the lawyers told us, don't come to India. Number 1, what does that tell us? And that's why we ended up in Colombo, and we are restarting, by the way, next week.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And then I was in Pondicherry exactly a month ago. There was a former ambassador who was making a point about the current regime, if I might use the term, in India. And as he started to speak, we were over breakfast. It's an Indian ambassador from the Indian Foreign Service, and retired. As he began to speak, he suddenly looked over his shoulder to see if there was anyone there before he spoke his mind. Second anecdote. Third anecdote is about a year ago, in Delhi, we organized an event titled Himal South Asian together with my colleague Honorita Mojumdar. We organized an event at the India International Center titled Demagoguery in the Age of, if I remember correctly, Digital Media. And interestingly, because the demagoguery, as it is currently racing ahead in Nepal, is essentially focused around one gentleman named Mr. Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of India. But his name did not come through in that entire discussion by 5 or 6 journalists until somebody raised a question from the audience. That's when that name made the entry into that discussion. So to me, these matters indicate something rather insidious happening in India. And as I said before, it doesn't do good for Indians, doesn't do good for the rest of South Asia.
Thanks. Ayush, you work with the Committee to Protect Journalists, and I was seeing the data on your website just before this, and the graph of the attacks on journalists and the lives lost. So while on all other parameters, be it people coming above the poverty line, people being pulled out of poverty across the world, basic social and human values, there's an upward trend in the sense that things are getting better. I observed that as far as attacks on journalists go, no matter how evolved we believe we get as societies and as a species, that in fact there are some spike years in the recent ones. So from the macro perspective of the committee that you're a part of, the organization that you're a part of, do you see a certain homogeneity in how power reacts to the media irrespective of where it is? And is there any improvement over the years?
Am I audible? There's actually the only homogeneity is that journalists who work in small towns, who work who are especially vulnerable, and the way power reacts to them is that the minute they decide, the minute they uncover sand mafias or a nexus between criminals and politicians, irrespective of which political party the politician belongs to, they come under attack. I started at CPJ in September 2016, and I have documented, I've actually lost count of the number of people I've documented in small town India who've come under attack because they exposed mafia links, politician mafia links. And this is not, as I said earlier, this is not particular to a political party. It's just that it's just the nature of power itself. And one reason why this happens, and this is happening constantly with impunity, is because over the last 26 years since CP just recorded data of journalists under attack in India, we've recorded, I think, about 27 journalists who were killed in the line of duty. But not one, I repeat, not one case has reached conviction. Nobody has ever been convicted for the killing of a journalist. Now, this sort of thing only emboldens those who think that it's fair game to attack journalists. And if journalists are to be prevented from being attacked, I think at least one of these, even if there's one conviction, that would go a long way in proving to be a debtor, to these people who want to attack journalists.
Right, so, okay, that doesn't change. Obviously, evolution of power is not happening. I'm just terrible with mics, clearly. Hartosh, while we understand that is the nature of power and the judicial system, there are many problems with what we've inherited. I've been told, and I do remember before Twitter and Facebook became a thing when I was much younger and I just joined the profession, there was still public support for journalists. So, while we understand that power may not back the protection or may pursue convictions, there was a certain support you got from people. Now, there have been cases that you and I are aware of. Journalists go into a crowded place and there are slogans not against the politicians but against journalists. As a society, do we back journalists? We understand that's what power does, but where have we lost our way? And why is that?
Look, I think it's a complicated question. There are 2-3 things to it. But the public mood is often reflected even in the presence of a demagogue. Modi was the reflection of a public mood. Now, how that representation of the public mood reacts to criticism or the media is reflective of the interaction between the public and the media. Today, and actually we've got a lot of support on the Loya story. There is public support. There may not be public support for journalism, but public support for journalism on the Loya issue is huge. And public support for journalism today is stronger than it was 3 years ago. Despite the fact social media has been used to target slander in ways it was not possible 10 years ago, that is also because the public mood regarding Narendra Modi has changed. The public itself has sort of re-evaluated its estimation of what demagogues were doing and what they were saying about the media. So that process happens constantly. But even so, I think in the Indian context, Facebook, Twitter, social media, technology do become tools through which public mood is also driven. It's not a one-way process, it's a two-way process. Power also interacts to drive public moods in different fashions. And in the long term, in South Asia, especially India, this is a real danger. And the danger is not simply of a Modi, because Modi is a phenomenon, he's a symptom, he will disappear. We are seeing a significant right-wing shift in our politics, in our society, in bigotry at every level, which is different from what we see in Europe and the US. That is because it is not something that comes and goes with elections. The RSS is gaining ground, providing a cardinal-based right-wing shift in this entire society. I hate to sound dire, but we have come from Vajpayee to Modi. And even under Modi, it's possible to do a Loya story. We can get criticized, we can be called scurrilous, but we are still sitting here talking to everybody, we are free. I believe that if we are not able to strongly combat these tendencies, we are 10-15 years away from Turkey-like situations where the next person who will come in will be as to the right of Modi as Modi is to Vajpayee. And at that time, such dialogue will be impossible. And we are in that interregnum where we need to come out and maintain the integrity of institutions and media to whatever level we can. In that, yes, public mood is an important player as well.
Sure, Ayush come in. Though I just want to come in. I agree with you that there is tremendous support for journalism because that's why outfits like Wires and Newsround can even hope to set up a model which is ad-free. And I read a quote of Aristotle on the internet, which you know is always true. that never let go a chance to plug your product no matter what the platform. So Wire and News Laundry are subscriber enterprises. We are supported by subscribers paying, not ads. So log on, subscribe, and pay to keep news free. Okay, I've done one bit. You know, Ayush, what he said is right. I get that, but I mean, I do think with the kind of technology we have and how you can't clamp down on complete groupings of people, I think that may be a little more impossible. I mean, in 10, 15 years, it'll be harder to get to that stage of absolute control than easier.
Can I just before I think we should not put too much out there. So what? You will have a lot of people expressing opinion that maybe the lawyer case should have been investigated. What I'm saying is that you would not be able to do the investigation into the lawyer case that we did at Caravan in the first place. What is technology going to do with that? If the basic infrastructure of dissent collapses, so what? Technology is going to give voice to various people shouting against the government, but that's not enough. There has to be a sustained institutional mechanism in which dissent is played out in democracy, and that is in danger.
Yeah, you know, talking about institutions, what we've noticed at CPJ is, you know, how there's been institutional support to curb free speech and journalism in particular. I'll just give a few examples based on my own reporting. In February 2017, there was an event being organized at Ramjas University where Umar Khalid, a student at JNU, was charged with sedition, was supposed to come and speak. Some protests broke out, some clashes broke out, and in those clashes between police, students, journalists got caught and they were harmed. One of the journalists who I spoke to told me that when I was, you know, reporting, I was telling the policeman, "Why are you hitting us? We are journalists, we are just doing our jobs, don't do this." The policeman actually said, "We know you're a journalist, which is why we're going to hit you even harder." That's one instance. The second, you know, the case of Justice Karnan in the Calcutta High Court. The Supreme Court decided he was being impeached because he made some allegations of corruption against Supreme Court judges. The Supreme Court actually issued orders banning the media from you know, reporting that issue. So we've seen, you know, the growth of institutional support for free speech, and that, to my mind, is more worrying than anything else.
What do you think of the dialogue situation painted by Hartosh? Will it get better? And what I mean is, while I understand that it's a shouting place, Twitter and Facebook, what it also allows you to do is it allows you to find people and then physically gather. So there is a grouping that can push back harder than it was earlier. Just like 84 is not etched in our minds like 2002 is, purely because of the visual medium becoming part of it. So things like that, they play out parallelly. Even while that is happening, getting around from place to place is easier. Is the pushback going to be as strong as the clampdown?
I would say that online is very important, but offline is more so. In the sense that unless there is this link, and very fundamental link between offline and online, we will not be able to push back. And I agree with Hartosh in his assessment that we are seeing a rapid change in the landscape in a way that we won't even be able to recognize. And I agree with Kanak when he says that it has implications not just for India, because India was seen as a very important sort of whatever upholder of democracy, if it ever was. But the point is that India is now the site of great transformation, and I don't use the word transformation in a positive way at all. And here I think, the 2014 election was a very interesting one, although I would like to see it as something that, they say, even Arvind Gupta, who handled Modi's, sort of whole listing, and I believe he's going to handle the 2019 election, actually told a public meeting that we prepared from 2010 onwards, and we did it systematically. But I would say that Prime Minister Modi has actually been preparing ever since 2002. And what he has been able to do is to replace the the dialogical relationship between the media and power into a singular one. And we know that he has not given a public press conference since he's come to power. He's gone in for soft interviews, of course, of the kind that we saw Sudhi Chandra, Navika, and Shiv Shankar do recently. But he has also used the social media, Twitter, Facebook, in a way that is far more sophisticated than any Indian politician. In fact, international politician, maybe with the exception of a Trump or Obama, in being able to see the importance of this for one-way communication. And he, in fact, I don't know if any of you saw that wonderful interview with Narendra Modi done in, I think, 1998, 2000, thereabouts, where he said that, I love the internet, I watch the internet. He was the one who had a cell phone far before anyone else. He advocated the use of a digital camera to capture election imagery far before anyone else. In 2009, when Facebook and Twitter were available to Indian audiences, he was the one who enrolled. And the use, the use of Facebook, and what we know through the Cambridge Analytica controversy, is that the use of aggregated data of the voter was very important in the 2014 election. I don't think we get to the bottom of this entire thing. We know it was one of the most expensive campaigns ever fought. And what precisely went into that is something that I think it will take a long, long while to announce. So that's the worry I have, when you place a little bit of hope in that medium. Of course it's an important medium, and we should use it for the good, but the capture of it and the use of it is by forces perhaps far more powerful than us, is something we should also keep in mind.
Sure, there are theories that it is leading to behavior change in societies, but Kanak, if you could comment on this, is India seen, because we are all part of the painting, so we can't really view it maybe as dispassionately as you. So you, being not from India and not having that much skin in the game here, is India seen as something worth emulating, the model of media and governance that we have? Is it seen as big brother or big bully?
Well, if you go back to the tense used by Pamela, India was seen as an exemplar in journalism. That statement should reverberate around this room, because what it means is media freedom goes to the heart of society and its aspirations beyond identity to social economic growth and justice, social justice. So, if India now, we're using the past tense at this point, at this moment, when talking about freedom of expression in India, then it impacts each one of us, which means that the situation is dire. And without putting any kind of patina on the situation in other countries of South Asia, just because your question is relating to India, let me say firstly that things are pretty bad elsewhere as well. But we thought India would save itself. And therefore we thought we could always, like we used to talk about the United States as an exemplar, India, at least parts of Indian media were exemplars. But what do we see in India today? Except for the exceptions, much of it is actually represented among you all here on this panel, for which the university needs to be congratulated for bringing you together here. But beyond that, what you see is actually, you see self-censorship rife. And so, in the past, when we were learning journalism, we had taught about censorship, the state authority coming down on you. But there's this insidious mix of state and social media. I even call it radical populism, that the social media thus far, because we are all in the first generation of utilizing it, it has been hijacked by radical populism by and large, although there is still space for the rest of us to communicate and to share information. I think that between the state in India and radical populism using social media in India, there is a self-censorship that is impacting publishers, impacting editors, impacting reporters. From the level of the troll to the level of the state using the tools it has at its hands, as I mentioned earlier. So, what is required, it seems to me, is the term used by Hartosh, which is the pushback. To think that in India at this age, we're now saying that using the word dissent, which was used in Sri Lanka, in parts of India certainly, in Pakistan, in Nepal, in Bangladesh. Now actually here, in the NCR region, you're using the term dissent. So, as I said, the tense that India used to be an exemplar in media, tells us something about where India is going in terms of its social, economic, cultural arena. And I would only end by saying, Abhinandan, that as we go into introspection here in the NCR region, it's important to understand that others have fought this type of a battle, continue to fight it, perhaps requiring even more courage than in India. And I would use the example of Pakistan. Earlier I spoke about Motiur Rahman and Mahfuz Anam. I would talk about Lasanta in Sri Lanka. But for now I will talk about Pakistan, because Pakistan, the Indian media, with its weaknesses on covering the neighborhood, which we will have to have another panel for. So I will not get into that. But I would say that for the practitioners in Indian media to look at the mirror, they should first look across to the Pakistani, to the glass at Pakistan, because Pakistan as a state has been pilloried, but in the Indian media and by Indian, the big and the powerful in India. But in doing that, you're also pillorying the people of Pakistan. And that is where the media of Pakistan also gets carried away. So I would just suggest to you that if dissent requires courage and a little bit of comparative knowledge, look at what our peers in Islamabad and Karachi and Lahore have been doing all these years. And I would just use one example, let us use the name Parvez Woodboy. I hope some of you are writing these names down so you can go and check it out. Parvez Woodboy speaks against quote-unquote Islamic fundamentalism, against the state, and against the local hoodlums who are the ones who come and get you in the end, continuously, not only in the English language, but in Urdu. Not only in print media, but on television. I will not explain that further, let you think about it, especially the students here. What does that mean? What level of commitment to society and what level of courage required to do something like that for decades on end, and then how much of that does exist across over in the east, whether it's Nepal or Bangladesh or India.
Okay, so I guess next time you go check out real estate in Pakistan, when you're told to go to Pakistan, you can check out the state of media there as well. But I mean, I'm not just saying this because I'm a hopeless optimist. I genuinely believe this, and I'm just saying this to take the other point of view. I do think the suggestion is a bit. I mean, it's bordering on paranoia that it's the worst of times. I think every generation thinks it's the best of times and the worst of times. Like a Tale of Two Cities says, or as Harivansh Rai Bachchan said in that poem of his कि अपने युग में सबको अद्भुत ज्ञात हुई अपनी हाला अपने युग में सबको अद्भुत ज्ञात हुआ अपना प्याला फिर भी वृद्धों से जब पूछा एक यही उत्तर पाया अब न रहे वो पीने वाले अब न रही वो मधुशाला. So everyone thinks, dude, in our times it was very hard. I remember when I was a child in Dehradun, there were two confectioners, and when the 84 happened, the sales of the Surdi confectioner went to zero. We knew that, everyone there knew that, but he was not on television saying this what's happened to me. I think we have seen that the data of the CPJ tracker suggests that, there have been spikes before this time, and probably there will be spikes after this time. So, to hinge this entire assault of media to a particular um, the rise of a particular individual, a particular ideology, if you were to like really analyze, and Hartosh, you've had a long and illustrious career as a journalist, can you think back and tell me that really this is as bad as it's ever been?
I don't think at this moment I can disagree more strongly with the sentiments you expressed. One, these are not the worst of times. What I'm saying is times are going to get much worse. That's very different from saying these are the worst of times. Second, I think the statistics Ayush pointed to, small town journalists, I think it's important to keep note of them, keep focusing on it. But they are not related to the problem we are talking about. And I must make this distinction, we keep making this mistake. And it relates to the point Kanak is making about Pakistan. In India, censorship, suppression, the lack of dissent is not tied to physical fear. It is tied to the efficiency of a state and the superstructure of media that we have created, in which technology is a very enabling factor. When I say the rise of the right wing, I only mean that the right wing is authoritarian, it exercises power in a centralized form, and it can do this efficiently.
Tax laws, compliance laws, stuff like that as well.
Well, basically, yeah. In India, why do we have so much control? It's to do with the corporate structures, ownership, how this ownership can be controlled. Unlike Pakistan, you don't even have to threaten owners. They already know what will happen. They are not going to die. Their businesses are going to suffer. Journalists know that they'll have problems getting jobs. This is a far more insidious and effective means of control. It is exercised best in an efficient, well-functioning state where such a structure is under control. Dissent actually is more difficult, not because small-town journalists are under threat. It is because big-town journalists are not under physical threat, but the threats are far more insidious, persistent, and always present. And that is the future where we are heading towards.
Ayush, would you agree with that? Because while, fine, there is the threat to businesses, and there will be threat to businesses as there are more businesses, and post 92, the rise of businesses has significant and remarkable, even as there is the issue of income disparity and inequality. But there are just so many more journalists. I mean, look at, I run something that has like 25 people. I don't know how many people you have. Those monoliths that today, what's happening in the Supreme Court is because of two very small outfits. It's not Times of India or Express. So if there are hundreds of us, how many can you suppress, really? In the good old days, you could suppress 5 and that's it.
On this, I know
Hartosh will disagree, so we'll come back to him.
On this, I'm going to lean on Hartosh's argument about, it's not about how many you can suppress. Suppression is not always overt. One way of suppression is the use of criminal defamation threats. The minute you file a threat of criminal defamation against even one journalist, the message goes out to 10 other journalists that this is what will happen to us if we were to do the kind of story that X journalist did. And this is what we call the chilling effect, So suppression, so no matter how, you can have 20,000 journalists, but if there are instruments, there are legal instruments in the hands of governments, in the hands of big corporations, suppression will happen. And to your earlier point about are these the worst of times? These are actually the worst of times. I mean, in 2018, rather 2-3 months ago, my colleagues from CPJ were in India. We were meeting journalists, free media activists, philanthropists in Delhi, Bombay, and Bangalore. Almost every reporter and editor we met has echoed the sentiment that this is probably the most frightening time to be a journalist because of the various threats that we face. Political, corporate, financial, but that's slightly different. So yeah, these are the worst of times, and who knows, they might even get even more worse.
Yeah, Pamela, Indian Express famously ran that ran that empty page on the emergency.
Yes, in
Yeah.
fact, I thought we'd go back to the emergency because I'm the older one in this panel, and I was a kid. I had just come into the Times at that point, so I realized I didn't know what the emergency was all about, you know. So, but there was silence, palpable silence in the big newsroom of the Times of India. Palpable silence. People didn't know what to make of it when the order first came out. And it did. It had that demonstration effect that Ayush talked about. That you do it to one person, you put one person in jail, and the message gets across. Even your toughest editors of those days would also sit back. But the difference really was that in those days, perhaps the editorial office having been undermined to the extent that it has today. There has been compromise in the structural nature of journalism as we know it. And so there is now the collapse of editorial function and managerial functions within the media, and therefore even resistance of the kind that we saw in the emergency, there was resistance. Khushwant Singh said, I will not bring out the Illustrator Weekly for 2 weeks. And he didn't for 1 week. By the next week he had, and in fact, one of his subsequent covers had Sanjay Gandhi next to the prototype of the Maruti. I remember that cover. So I mean, people are fallible, definitely. But there was the editor who was willing to say to that extent. Right now, what happens is that many editors actually speaking a language we can't hear. We can't distinguish from the people who are making decisions in power, political power. So that distinction has been collapsed, and that's, I think, what's worrying, you know. In 1977, when emergency was lifted, there was a palpable sense that we will not let this happen again. And, you know, some of the most important stories we've had came from, I mean, there was real people went out. I don't know if you know about the Kamla story. I don't know any of you here, journalist students, have heard of the Kamla story. It was the first story of that showed that women could be bought from a marketplace for sexual favor. Because this person was actually bought and brought in front of the public, you know. It was a terrible thing to do. I wouldn't do it today. It was I think, a strategy that completely violates every sense of integrity, bodily integrity included. But the point is that there was that attempt to try and, you know, sort of go to the heart of what makes us tick as a nation, and try and critique it. Of course, 1984 happened, and I know that the Times of India did the worst editorials, you know. In fact, I don't know if Hartosh would remember, he was not in a school kid, but yeah. So, I mean, the point is that over a period of time, there's a ceding of ground that has happened, which is worrying. And so when we think of the best of times versus nothing is actually absolute, and I would say that we should be cautious. I agree with that point that we should be cautious about saying that this is the ultimate. But the possibility, I mean, today's is a pessimistic outlook, and we cannot avoid the pessimism. It is there in the air, and I think as the election year comes upon us, it's going to get worse.
Kanak, you probably have the best recollection of the emergency amongst us. But that question, and the second, if we can also just move towards solutions, how can this be combated? I mean, one of course is shouting on social media. I'm not sure how perfect that is, but from your experiences, because of Nepal, you know, saw that entire Prajam coming in and going out, there was a whole lot of political, instability. How did that impact the media? How did the media negotiate that space? Yeah, first the emergency.
I think, just to write off your point, how did Nepal show that resilience and how did it negotiate the space? I would say one example. The term vernacular is not preferred in India, but in Nepal we don't have a problem in saying vernacular journalism. Most of my writings I do in Nepali. in the Nepali language. There is not the English to vernacular divide in Nepal that you have in Pakistan or in India or in Sri Lanka. In that sense, Nepal is closer to Bangladesh. I think the fact that Nepal's media was using intellectually acute democratic space was being kept open by vernacular media, whether online or print or radio or television. And radio is where Nepal is ahead of the rest of South Asia, in that Nepal has had a FM radio revolution where each radio station can do its own news programming. There is no state hand banning such news programming. So I think essentially it's vernacular, to bring it down to one term, vernacular media saved the day in Nepal. And likewise, it seems to me that ultimately, I was speaking to Samrat in the audience here earlier, ultimately it's very important to raise the flag of alarm. I believe that things probably have not been this bad in terms of looking ahead, where the graph is going in terms of media freedom, which then means everything else for society. Ultimately, I think there will be a pushback. But the question is, how long before that pushback? And I think that pushback has to come from, if I were as a Nepalese looking into India, the pushback had got to come from, if you will, the states and the vernacular media in the states. Because if there is a very insidious state-led effort using all tools in its hand, from ground level goons to taxation, to push authoritarian kind of society, then that pushback has to come from all over, not only from the NCR region and some online media that have held the flame. That is not enough. Now, in terms of how was it in the emergency, I might come from Kathmandu, but I was in Delhi studying at the Delhi University School at the law faculty there, 1975 to 1977, to 78. And I remember the silence even in the DTC buses in Mudrika, traveling on the ring road, nobody talking to each other. Forget about media. People were afraid to talk to each other on political matters. And when I shared with you earlier, the retired ambassador, who was looking around before he spoke to me, his mind on what is happening in India, it gives you a sense. But why is it more dangerous than then? Indira Gandhi, when she did the emergency, did not have the system that the BJP has today. There's not the Bajrang Dals and the access networks around the country. And you just cannot evade that point when you compare what India has been through before and what India is going through now, and where it may go in future, that there are if you will, the stormtroopers are ready. And therefore, and I believe that the stormtroopers will not win. But for that, you may lose a decade or two if you're not careful now. So I'm all for saying that things have not been as bad as this from a perspective seen from Kathmandu.